Welcome, my friends, to the Sage of Quay Radio Hour, your home for free and critical thinking, and I'm your host, Mike Williams. Tonight, my friend and regular guest, Sofia Smallstorm, returns to the show. Our discussion is based on one of Sofia's recent newsletters, where she takes us through a concept known as biological darkness, where the controllers have created a septic world, an environment which thrives upon the lack of organic sunlight to foster disease and illness. We also discuss the elements of the trophic chain, along with how inflammation has been maligned, in an attempt to further impede our body's natural ability to heal. Sofia's personal newsletters are extremely insightful and available to subscribers with a $50 donation. Select newsletters are available free of charge on her site, so potential subscribers can check them out. And so without further ado, here's Sofia Smallstorm. Sofia, welcome back to the show. It's always a pleasure to have you join me to have one of our fascinating discussions. And you have your September newsletter, which is subscription-based on your website. I know you have a few samples up there for people to take a look at. I always find your newsletters extremely intriguing, very interesting, and very thought-provoking. And this recent newsletter, I guess we could sum it up with a term that you and I spoke about. Actually, you introduced me to it offline, which is biological darkness. As we get into sepsis and we talk about inflammation and we talk about the trophic chain, I was wondering, how did you get into this with this newsletter? What intrigued you to write about this? Because it's not something that you're going to read a lot about. And again, you connected a lot of dots. So my curiosity was, how did you get into this one?
Okay, so Mike, several months ago, I saw a video, it was actually a flat earth video online, and it was by a guy called Shazvar Bukti. I don't even know who he is, but it was actually one of the better flat earth videos, making the full case, etc. But in one segment of it, I believe it was at 10 minutes 15, he talked about the distinct difference between sunlight and moonlight. And he said that sunlight was golden, warm, drying, life-giving, preservative, antiseptic, and cleansing, whereas moonlight was silver, cold, damp, promoted necrosis, sepsis, and putrefaction. And I thought about this, and I said, you know what? He's right. And that took me back to the trophic chain, the food chain on the earth, which is composed of different life forms, some of whom thrive in the daytime under the sun, and others of whom thrive at night when there is no sun. So basically, the food chain is called the trophic chain. Tropha in Greek means food, and it's composed of producers, consumers, and then detritivores at the top. So the producers are plant forms that use sunlight to make their own food. Producers don't go out and get food and hunt it and kill it or gather it and eat it. They don't do any of that. They simply use the light of the sun, plants, to make chlorophyll, the green stuff that is their food. And they pull nutrients from the soil to help them in this production of food. Then you have consumers above them, all kinds of animals, and they are arranged in, order of size, and some are carnivores, some are herbivores, but they eat the producers. And then you have consumers that eat the smaller consumers, all the way up the animal chain to the apex consumers who have no enemies in their respective terrain. So that would be the wolf, the tiger, the rattlesnake, the lion, the white shark in the ocean, the bull shark. And when those life forms die, they are descended on by the decomposers. These are actually very small microorganisms, bacteria, fungi. They are also called the detritivores because they eat detritus, waste. And they are the life form that breaks up all of the bones, the carcass, what is inedible, uneatable to other life forms, into nutrients for the soil and the earth and the producers all over again. So during the night, in the absence of the sun, when it's damp and dark and cold and dank, that's when the detritivores work. Sunlight kills detritivores. Sunlight is a disinfectant. It chases away mold. Bacteria can't tolerate heat. They grow in cold, dank places. and spaces. So that's what made me see that we have a sepsis and an anti-sepsis cycle that equally shares the day, right? The day being 24 hours. And if you look at the day over the entire year, then the sepsis and antisepsis is parceled out equivalently over the seasons, right? We have shorter days, longer nights, and then vice versa.
Right.
The qualities of moon and sun light were never really laid out for me in the way that he did. And then I realized that it all has to do with the trophic chain and the decomposers working at night. So let's talk about sunlight. It is antiseptic. Nobody would deny it promotes life. I mean, it is warm and it's essential to the manufacturing of vitamin D in our bodies. Vitamin D is a hormone that affects thousands of genes and enables dozens, if not hundreds, of interactions in our body that have to do with our metabolism and biochemistry. So let me just say something. If you live north of Atlanta, Georgia, that latitude, you cannot make vitamin D at all between the months of November and February because the sun is out there. It's going toward the Tropic of Capricorn, right? And then if you are north of Atlanta, Georgia, you've got to be at the right place. The right time, 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. to make vitamin D. So we're very deficient in vitamin D, which is why so many of us start, getting sick and weaker in the winter. Our skin gets thinner. We desperately need the sun. And people are being taught today to avoid the sun with sunscreens. People spend all this time indoors under artificial light. They're introducing light with frequencies that do not have the full spectrum, the LED lights, the compact fluorescence. You need to have full sunlight, full spectrum light, which, by the way, incandescents do provide, according to the photobiologist Alexander Wunsch. I put interviews of him up on my blog. And Wunsch says that we absolutely need proper whole light, which brings with it thermal energy, heat, in order for our biological functionality to be optimal. He says, this was another term that really grabbed me. He says that in the absence of proper, full, whole light, meaning yellow, golden light with heat that comes along with it, in the absence of that, we are living in biological darkness.
Yeah, that's a very powerful way to describe it. And just going back to the sunlight for a second, Sophia, we have, from what I've read, an epidemic of a deficiency in vitamin D in our population today. And it goes back to what you just said. Aside from the fact that every time you go to the dermatologist, they tell you to put all this sunscreen on, wear a hat, wear a shirt, basically just cover yourself up. The sun is not good for you. Don't go to the beach. And then people just spending all of their time indoors, most of the time due to the fact they have to go to work and so on. And I guess we'll get into this, not to mention the fact that the spraying is blocking the sunlight. So, and I know that we'll talk about this a little bit more, but when I read your newsletter, it started to sound like there's something behind this as far as an agenda maybe versus this is the lifestyle of people. I mean, it is a lifestyle for people, but I think the lifestyle has been manufactured and orchestrated to a certain degree in order to keep people out of the sunlight.
Right, Mike. In fact, the way I would put it is that the powers that be are promoting the sepsis side of the cycle. Let's look at chemtrails. The spraying of aerosols that blanket the sky with a white haze, that actually changes the quality of sunlight from golden and yellow to white and cold, right?
Right.
And it makes it more like moonlight. In fact, molds and spores thrive in this filtered sun. They do better under cloud cover than they do under full bright sunlight. So we've got a power level that has actually even engineered molds and fungi and introduced them into the fallout of chemtrails to proliferate in this diminished sunlight. So the sepsis part of the cycle is being supported by the assaults that are being perpetrated on us that deteriorate our vitality and resilience in systems in general, from GMOs to vaccines to really the type of light bulbs, with the frequencies that they're giving us now. They're going to do away with the incandescents. Everything they do, I was listening to an interview with Dr. Andrew Saul about hospitals. Hospitals don't have proper lighting, and when you're in artificial lighting with bad food, bad, drugs being given to you as supposedly curatives and healing agents, you are being shoved full force into body sepsis. And in fact, infections, it's called septic shock and sepsis. Infections are the biggest killer in hospitals now. They outnumber cancer, stroke, and heart disease as cause of death.
Now, Sophia, for the purposes of the audience, when we talk about sepsis, we're talking about infection?
Overall, we're talking about that half of the day-night cycle that promotes the decomposers of the world to do their thing. Decomposers take us apart.
Right.
We are full of microorganisms. We're surrounded by microorganisms. Just grab a microscope and look through it. But we live in cooperation and harmony with microorganisms. The germ theory of disease, Mike, which was brought to us, really sold to us by Louis Pasteur, the French scientist, that theory says that there are all kinds of different diseases, and each of these diseases is caused by a germ or a virus, right? A bacteria or a virus, or in some cases, genetic weaknesses. And they all require outside intervention from drugs and surgery to fix. So the strategy, you could call it, of modern medicine is to find a drug and match it to an ailment. When Pasteur was alive, his big enemy was this guy called Antoine Béchamp. He was born in 1816, died in 1908. He was a French chemist, also a doctor, and he said that it is what is inside us, our bioterrain, that causes disease because it's out of whack, it's out of balance. So he believed in something called pleomorphism, which is that all the microbiological life that lives in us, it tailors itself to the menu that our body offers it in terms of how our own biological terrain goes wrong. So we have microorganisms, this is my way of putting it, that live in us, and they are the trash men of our system. We also have our own cell lines in the process of healing and repair that march in first, and they break down organic debris, the dying cells. We're sloughing dying cells all the time. We're constantly rebuilding our cells and our tissues. And so the dead cells are munched up by our own lysosomes, which are the first line of cell breakdown, and then they're followed by the big eater cells in a process called chemotaxis. And so our body does its own job of eating up dying material, our own dying tissues. But when it doesn't eat all of it, if we don't support our body with the right nutrients, the right water, enough oxygen, sunlight, good food, minerals, we're going to end up with too much breakdown and too little repair. When we have too much breakdown, we have all these microorganisms living inside us. In cooperation, we are their host. You could call them parasites. And our parasites say, wow, this organism I'm in isn't doing well. I'm going to start cleaning it up. So in order for parasites to thrive, it's called successful parasitis, I think it is. In order for parasites to thrive, they have to not let their host die. So these bacterial forms and the fungi like yeast that live inside us, when we have too many dying cells, they start eating, and they start doing the toxin cleanup because that's part of the whole system of our internal bioterrain.
So, Sophia, is it fair to say then these sepsis cycles are disproportionate? So, in other words, because of all of the artificial light, because of the spraying and the blocking of the natural sunlight, that what happens is these decomposers, as you mentioned before, they have a disproportionate amount of time in which to do their work, and so they're there longer. And so what happens is, using the human body, it's out of balance.
The detritivores and decomposers are around us and in us. If our body isn't supported with enough light and enough nutrition in all the right forms, our health maintenance cannot take place. So as we start to decline, as we start to get sick, as we start to degenerate, as we start to decline, our body attempts its own healing, which is performed by the lines of cells, the specialty cells it has within it, to repair tissues and to consume wastes. And if it can't provide enough of those cells, then the detritivores, the decomposers that are inside us, they have to become the garbage men and eat everything up. And if they have a ton of garbage to feed on, meaning dying organic cellular material from our own tissues, then they proliferate. And it's their toxic wastes that they shed in us that contaminates us eventually to the point that we end up with massive infection, and they have to flush us with antibiotics as a remedy.
Okay, so I want to read something from page 1 of your newsletter, which I found very interesting. I think it kind of recaps what it is we're saying here. Mainstream medicine believes that virtually all illness is caused by germs or genetic hereditary weakness, as well as deformities and trauma. The truth is, most illness is due to cellular malfunction caused by cellular toxicities and cellular malnutrition, both of which can be avoided and overcome naturally. So the reason why I bring this up is because many people are going to have a hard time getting their heads wrapped around what it is we're discussing here and what you're explaining to us. Because what I just read here, the first part of that paragraph, is that mainstream medicine believes that illness is all caused by germs and genetic hereditary weakness or trauma. Yet what I believe you're saying is that that's not true.
That is not true. Germs are our friends. Chemicals are not our friends. In the 1950s, do you remember all that stuff about spraying, housewives keeping their houses as clean as possible? The authorities are saying, well, that antibacterial soap might not be as good as we thought. You need to learn to coexist with these germs and bacteria, and we always did. But what's happening now is we're coming into contact with too many man-made inorganic compounds. Our bodies have traces of up to 100,000 man-made compounds that are unnatural, and they are detrimental to tissues. Chemicals erode and harm tissues. So we have way too much chemical and radiation and other kind of infiltration, toxicity challenges, you could say. And our bodies just aren't up to the task of doing all this repair. We're deficient in cellular energy. Really, you could put it this way, Mike. All disease is due to energy deficiency in the cell. The little teeny cells cannot maintain themselves. They cannot keep themselves free of hazards and toxins and do their basic housekeeping. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And the reason why I'm drilling down is because this is going to be very difficult for a lot of people to, like I said before, to get their heads wrapped around it, because they have been taught exactly what I said before, that everything is external. And we need all of these pharmaceuticals and all of these medicines in order to overcome these external-based inputs into our body. So, if we don't have these pharmaceuticals, if we don't have these drugs, then we can't combat a disease, or we can't combat bacteria or viruses or whatever. So I think, like I said, it's going to be difficult for folks to get comfortable with this, because the first thing, I think you and I talked offline the other day, and we said even people who are into holistic healing and medicine, alternative medicine, as soon as something happens, as an example, cancer, they abort the whole holistic mindset and they run right to a mainstream doctor, and then they march right into chemotherapy and radiology. So what's that about?
Let's just think this through like logical human beings, okay? I'm not a doctor. I'm not an expert. Neither are you. But we're going to try to be logical, right?
Right.
Most people don't self-diagnose that they have cancer, right?
Correct.
They know something's wrong. They might have a big lump, or they might have a lot of pain, or they no longer can eat properly or swallow, or something's going on, and they go to a doctor. And the doctor recommends tests, and the tests show a mass, and then a biopsy is done. And the cells that are drawn out of that mass show to be cancerous. Then they're told they have cancer. Now they're already in the clutches of those people. So those people tell them, oh, you have cancer. You're going to have chemotherapy and or radiation. They're already there. 6 months ago, all they had was a lump or some discomfort. They didn't know they had cancer. I don't know a single person who says, you know what, I've got cancer. I'm going to go to such and such healing modality and treat myself naturally. They always get their diagnosis from the mainstream authorities and hospitals. So the thing is, I learned from Mike Anderson, who made a great film called Healing Cancer from the Inside Out, that when you're diagnosed with cancer, chances are you have had it a very long time. I'm going to talk about Dave McGowan for a minute. Dave McGowan said on interviews, lots of people on the internet said that Dave McGowan was killed. He was given his cancer, stage 4. They took him out because of his research. All right. Now, I knew Dave. I had talked to him on the phone several times, and we did an interview. We wrote a lot of emails. I'd never met him because he started to decline, and I didn't want to go up there and bother him. I wanted to walk Laurel Canyon with him sometime. But anyway, Dave did acknowledge on an interview he did with Maria Heller that he was waking up in the night unable to breathe, strangulated, for 1 entire year. So he had something going on in his chest or his respiratory system or his throat that did not allow him to breathe, waking up choking for 1 year. Okay, so what was that? Was that something unrelated to his cancer? Probably not, right?
Right.
And he only sought a diagnosis when the pain got really, really bad. That's what drives people finally to get help, because they can't do something that they normally would do. They can't go to the bathroom, they can't breathe, they can't eat, they can't drink, or they have terrible pain. People who are diagnosed with cancer usually have it for a very long time. And cancer is totally caused by energy deficient cells. Those cells are now going into what's called fermentation. Cells normally make their food they make their cellular fuel in the nucleus. They use ATP, adenosine triphosphate. It's an electron-packed nanobattery, and each of your cells, depending on what kind of cell it is, can contain up to 1 million or more ATP batteries. So when the cell can't make ATP inside the nucleus using oxygen, when the mitochondria, those are the little systems that make the ATP, when they are fatigued, when you have what's called mitochondrial failure, your cell will start to make energy, plan B, in the cytoplasm. That's the surrounding water-based matrix around the nucleus inside the cell. The cytoplasm will be the energy production center of the cell, and the cell will use glucose and enzymes to make energy. This is called glycolysis. It is a default we have in our bodies. When the nucleus is not working to make our energy, we'll go to the cytoplasm. So cancer cells are called glycolytic cells. They do two things. They surround themselves with a very thick protein shield because they want to be highly defended from more intrusion and influx, and they become sugar feeding. They may not make it. They also go into what's called unregulated division. They reproduce. They're psycho. They reproduce, desperately trying to keep themselves alive. And that's a tumor. So you've got a sugar-feeding cell that is desperate to reproduce, to keep its colony or its clan alive, because cells reproduce, they themselves divide, cellular subdivision. 1 becomes 2, 2 become 4, etc. So that's your tumor mass. And then, let's say those cells are still not thriving, because they're not. They're sick cells, cancer cells. They're full of sugar. So you've got yeast around them going, whoa, look at this diet. I love sugar. And you've got yeast feeding on those half alive cancer cells. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's the microorganism partner of the cellular system. That's the detritivore going, I've got a big buffet here. Then you end up with people who have candida infections because the candida are overrunning their bodies because there's so much sugar in there to feed on from the dying cells.
Well, let's go back to Dave McGowan for a moment here now, because I'm sure some are going to be asking this question. So what options did Dave have? In other words, was it to the point where the external factors like the artificial light, lack of nutrition, lack of sunlight, all that stuff had gotten to the point where the body can't overcome whatever the issue is, in his case, cancer? Or, I mean, in other words, I guess the question is, what options did Dave have at that point in his life? How could he have healed himself, or was it even possible without trying, mainstream medicine for cancer treatment?
I don't want to discuss Dave because I wasn't his doctor. I don't even know that much about his situation.
Well, we'll just use anybody. Who has cancer.
Okay, yeah. So when you wait a very long time to get a diagnosis, and look, I'm going to say this. We all love Dave, but he also admitted on that same interview that he smoked for 40 years. He was a heavy smoker. Now, do we know that heavy smoking may cause lung cancer? Do we know this?
We do.
Okay. So when you are in a situation of great discomfort and you have followed what we call a bad lifestyle, poor health choices, poor diet, and you end up sick, you end up with cancer, the first thing you can do is start reversing the habits that you've built up. But habits are hard to change. And many people are already convinced that they're not going to change their habits. They're going to go to the medical world and find the quickest fix they can. So chemotherapy is often chosen by people who are heavily influenced and pressured by the system, doctors and nurses. Chemotherapy drugs cost tens of thousands of dollars, and doctors make a kickback from them. All anyone has to do is watch the Ty Bollinger Cancer series. We know cancer is big, big business. So when people are diagnosed with an illness of any kind, or they don't feel well, or they have some kind of issue going wrong in their body that's noticeable, I would say it makes sense to re-examine everything you're doing. Start eating the best food you can. Get out in the sun so that you make plenty of vitamin D. A lot of people take oral vitamin D, but it's not comparable really to being in full spectrum light. Go outside. Drink in the sunlight, especially through your eyes. Take in the bright light of day. Don't wear your sunglasses constantly. Let your skin be exposed, because all kinds of biochemical activities are taking place when you are in the light of day, in clean air. Now, I know a lot of us don't have this available to us. We're stuck in office jobs, or we have to drive, or, we just don't have the option of running off to the beach or kicking our shoes off in a meadow and earthing, feeling the soil. So what are we going to do, Mike? What are we going to do?
Well, I guess that was my point, was that it goes back to what I said earlier in the conversation, is that the cards are stacked against us, because what we are taught about what's good for us or how to treat an illness or a disease or whatever it's just not the right way to go about it. We also have the suppression of treatments, things like cannabis, Rife technology, B17 Laetrile. I'm talking about cancer as an example. So I guess what I'm saying is that it's difficult for us to go about this in a natural way, the way the body is supposed to process and supposed to fight off disease or to fight off being ill, because we are constantly being bombarded with external elements that the body is trying to figure out what to do with. And there are, in my view, I'm not going to speak on behalf of you, Sofia, but I don't know where you stand on this, but there are treatments out there that are being suppressed, that, they're not talked about in the mainstream medical business. As I mentioned before, cannabis, Rife, B17 or Laetrile for cancer as an example. And there's lots of information on the web about that stuff, but it almost becomes anecdotal, because, the mainstream aspects of medicine won't embrace any of this stuff. They won't talk about it. They won't do any kind of research into it. They just stick to their model, and that's it. And that model is not good for us.
Right. I spent an afternoon with Charlotte Gerson. She runs the Gerson Institute. Her father was Max Gerson. And Charlotte Gerson explained to me that at their cancer center, which is in Cancer Treatment Center in Tijuana, it's out of the United States, they get a lot of stage 4 cancer patients. A lot, because these people have already tried chemo and radiation and it didn't work, and they're told, well, you might as well just make out your will and clean up your affairs. Then they find the Gerson Institute. They go to the Gerson Center, and they are put on the equivalent of 23 pounds of fruits and vegetables juiced every day. Now, you couldn't eat 23 pounds, particularly if you had stage 4 cancer and were failing. But she told me we give them a glass of juice, mixtures of different vegetables and fruits, and they sip this all day, and within 24 hours, they're already perked up, and within 48, they're starting to rebound. They have like a 70% remission rate with the people that they get in there. Now, what is juice? What is it? It's enzymes, vitamins, nutrients, all kinds of phytochemicals, minerals that the plants contain. Plants grow in soil, and they take their minerals, and this is all organic, by the way. They take they're producers. They pull minerals from the soil. So plants are mineral rich. Organic plants are mineral rich. Plants grown, food grown in pesticided soil is chemical rich, right? So when you just do the plain juicing, and that's one of the core activities of Gerson treatment, you can do it yourself. You can buy the tapes and the books, gerson.org, and learn how to do this yourself if you are not feeling well. But she said to me, this is a direct quote, we can treat anything. And almost anyone with any medical condition, any health condition, starts to perk up and come back when they come to our center, because they give them proper nutrition. So when your life is nutrient poor, and when your activities are in line with what goes on in the sepsis cycle, you are receiving too many man-made inputs, GMOs, chemtrails, vaccines, office lighting, no fresh air, no exercise, bad water with fluoride and chlorine in it. What do you expect? So I would say the best thing to do is everybody needs to start educating themselves. And there is so much to learn, Mike. What I've learned just recently about inflammation, which I would like to talk about in this interview as well, it just blows my mind.
Yeah, the inflammation part of your newsletter was really an eye-opener. I do want to say one thing, Sofia. Years ago, I used to suffer from midday lethargy, low energy, just dragging. And I remember, I was working and I would just feel tired. But as soon as I woke myself up and made a command decision to change my diet, to eat organically, to take the fluoride out of my water, to make sure I spent time outside, exercise, and doing all those things, all of that lethargy and feeling like you had low energy, that all went away. It all went away. And then 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock would come. And like right now, it's 2:45, and I feel great. And it was because I changed my diet. So it goes back to what you were just saying. Getting the right amount of vitamins, the enzymes and nutrients, eating the right things, and not having your food, as an example, contaminated with all of these chemicals and these pesticides and everything else that they're throwing into what it is that people are taking in.
Mike, we have in our bodies a universe of things. All of it is connected, just like the forest. In my newsletter, I discussed the fungi in the forest. The trees' roots and the plants' roots are covered with mycelium. Mycelium are clumps of fungus, and they are like the forest internet. They connect every tree and every plant to each other in the entire forest. Trees actually trade carbon and nitrogen with each other by their root systems. and there are these fungi wrapped around the roots, and they're in the cells of the roots. So the fungal world is the forest superhighway. Now, don't think we don't have that in our bodies. We have a superhighway in our bodies also. And I'm just going to give an example from the forest again. Every time you put your foot down in the forest, underneath your foot, underneath the footprint, you will find 300 miles of these tubules, these fungal tubules called mycelium. 300 miles under every footprint made in the forest. So our body is a universe that is full of these interconnected, interworking materials, components. Our immune system is not... Where is the immune system? Tell me, where is it? I don't know. You don't know. It's not like the brain I can point to my head, right?
Right.
The immune system is an interconnection of components. It consists of certain cells, like white blood cells are part of the immune system. And it consists of, microorganisms, partners in waste cleanup that live in our body. There was a very famous French doctor, René Dubos. He actually taught at Harvard. He was a professor of medicine. He wrote a book in 1959 called The Mirage of Health. And he said that science or medicine has been challenged to explain why so many varieties of microorganisms that live inside us that have the ability to kill us, they usually don't. They usually only get bigger and smaller, let's just call it the relationship of them to us, in a kind of waxing and waning equilibrium that we can't predict. So he says that microorganisms capable of persisting for prolonged periods of time in the body, and he calls this inapparent infections. This is the medical word. We have the presence of something that's foreign to us. Technically, that's an infection, but it's not even apparent because it's in a homeostasis with us. Suddenly, they undergo unrestricted multiplication with disastrous effects for their host. That would be us. And in each case, the outcome of that relation between the microorganism and the host changes according to the circumstances in which we're interacting. So let's just take the example of a disease that I started to study called meningococcal meningitis. All right, meningococcal meningitis is, technically it's an inflammation of the meninges, which is the lining between the brain and the skull. And ultimately, it may result in septic shock, meaning these bacterial forms called N. meningitidis. That's the bacteria that appears when you have meningococcal meningitis, that you've somehow contracted from somebody or something. When those bacteria proliferate in such giant numbers, they create this waste, this slimy waste that slides off their bodies and toxifies us, and then we die. That's septic shock. It's throughout our bloodstream. So let me ask you how this happens. Is there a bacteria called N. meningitidis? Have they ever seen it outside of somebody's body? Nope.
No.
My guess, I'm going to follow the school of pleomorphism, which says that these organisms, they form according to what they have available to eat. And what they're really doing is tissue cleanup. So meningitis, inflammation of the lining between the brain and the skull. Something has happened. That lining is injured. It's now producing cells that are dying. The body's own inflammation process comes in, which we'll address in a minute, to start healing those cells. Inflammation heals damaged tissue. It doesn't cause disease. It accompanies disease. And we'll get into that. But the body's own army to do the repairs doesn't do the trick because the body is not supported by proper light, proper water, oxygen, proper nutrition, proper food, proper everything. Rest is another big thing. All right? So what happens? The bacteria that are living around that area, they go, we have to help. We have to start eating this organic waste being made in the body that we're contained in. We want to stay alive. If our host dies, we die too. So they go into cleanup mode. They start feeding on the dying cells of the meninges. And there's so much food, they grow and grow and grow, and they shed their own waste. They don't want their waste inside them. That's why they have a slimy outside, and they shed it into our bloodstream, and now it's contaminating our blood. Now our blood cells start to suffer, and our blood is taking these damn bacteria wastes to every part of our body. Now we're in major organ failure. They flush us with antibiotics. We're in the hospital. How does that help? Well, often it doesn't help. But sometimes it helps because antibiotics start reducing the numbers of those over-multiplying bacteria. So now our body's own line of defense, those eater cells that themselves clean up organic waste and do repairs, they can get a foothold. They can regroup. They can become the army again. And that's how you would survive, right?
Right.
That's the only way antibiotics could possibly work. Because our partner garbage men, called detritivores, are starting to decompose us inside because there's too much waste. And they're multiplying so much that the balance of them and us is getting out of hand, and their toxins are going to kill us. So the antibiotic comes in, the antibiotics reduces their numbers, and then our cells can thrive a little more. So it's a dicey game, but sometimes it works.
So it gets back to what we were saying before. Again, I'm trying to put myself in the seat of the listener. So the point being is, if you want to avoid having yourself in that situation where they're pumping you with antibiotics and you're sitting in a hospital somewhere and being worked on and attended to, the trick is to wake up and get yourself healthy. Proper nutrition, eat correctly, sunlight, exercise, to do those things. And if you do those things, then you are going to exponentially, I'm going to say, decrease the odds that you're going to wind up in a situation down the line health-wise where you're going to wind up in a hospital somewhere under the care of Western medicine. I mean, that's my take on it. Does that sound reasonable?
Yes, I'll put it another way. So the body is a universe inside. Would you agree?
Yep.
And nobody has the eyes to see or inspect the entirety of that universe, right?
Right.
All you can acknowledge and note is the melodies that come out of that body in terms of its activity, the way it feels. It could be you. Balance, imbalance. The balance and imbalance is the interplay of what they call symbionts. Symbionts are the forms that live within us in a symbiosis. So the interplay of the symbionts and our own biological activity is the song of our body, right?
Right.
So, I mean, we're not alone in our body. We have millions of organisms living in our body, and they work with us in tandem. There's a cooperation. So the superhighway inside the body flows when the songs and symphonies are harmonious, and it jams up when they're not.
You know, what I find interesting, Sophia, sticking on this theme for a second here, when you talk about the being interconnected, the interplay, talking about the immune system, you know, as you were talking about that, and you were talking about the fungi, one of the things that goes on in this world is the destruction of all that interconnectedness. And I'm not just talking about the human body. I'm talking about the destroying nature, destroying the Amazon as an example, right? So again, you know, not to put my tinfoil hat on, but taking a step back and looking at this, it looks like, at least to me, it appears that there is a very, very good understanding by the people that control to systematically break down everything, not just our mind-body dynamic, but also the environment. It just seems like they know a lot more than I think that maybe we give them credit for as to how all of this stuff works. And, you know, step by step, very incrementally, very methodically, they're taking it apart.
Yes, you're exactly right. I mean, everything is a harmonious whole. And when you take a big knife and you go chop, 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 all over the cutting board, all over the earth, and you break up that hole, then you make everything isolated and helpless and frightened, and because it's not connected, it can't draw its sustenance from anything else. And we can't produce all our own sustenance, right? Even plants, the producers, they need the sun. So the sun is the thing that fuels the whole trophic chain. Yet, we can't just have life. Part of life is death and decay. So we've got to have that nighttime to break down the life that has died and re-render it into nutrients and productive elemental materials. And that's why we need an equal balance of sepsis and light. And we're not getting that. We're getting an over-concentration of the breakdown conditions.
It's mind-boggling when I think about it. When I sit back and I just pause and I reflect on what we're talking about here and I try to take it in, it is systematic and it's very dark and it's evil. You know, you would be naive, I think, to believe that this is all just happenstance. I mean, it's just coincidence that all of this stuff is just kind of going on. Once you start going down the rabbit hole, like you have on so many things, and you start looking at this stuff and you start to connect the dots, you see that there is an interrelationship going on. And it's just not a good thing for us, and it's not a good thing for the world. I was wondering with that, if you wanted to talk, if you're ready, if this is a good point to segue into inflammation, because that was another piece of your newsletter, which I think is going to surprise a lot of people based upon what people are told inflammation is and what it does and so on versus what you wrote in your newsletter.
Yes, I do want to talk about it. And I'm going to give the example of a man. I watched a program on CNBC, just stumbled into it, about some doctor who had billed Medicare $500 million for prescribing chemotherapy to thousands of patients who didn't need it. Many of them didn't even have cancer. He just told them they had cancer. They got scared. He told them they needed chemotherapy. He gets kickbacks for that, right? Every doctor who prescribes chemotherapy drugs gets kickbacks. So all these people, one of them, lots of them died. And one of them lost all his teeth, and he didn't even have cancer. He went elsewhere for another opinion and was told, I think twice told he did not have cancer, didn't need chemotherapy. And he was told all he had was a lot of inflammation. So here's the drum roll. Here's where our discussion starts. What is inflammation? We're told by the medical world that inflammation causes disease. Everywhere you look, inflammation is present and there's disease right there too. Well, guess what? Inflammation doesn't cause disease. It is an effort of the body to facilitate healing because it occurs in stages. Inflammation accompanies disease. It is present where disease and tissue damage or degeneration, injury is found. So the symptoms present at each stage of inflammation are misinterpreted by the medical world as bad. They have to be halted with drugs or bandages. You have to wrap up your swollen knee so that, you bring the inflammation down, you ice it. And all of this is going to interfere with the body's healing process, and it's not going to be able to repair the tissue properly. So what are the 5 noticeable symptoms of inflammation? Redness, swelling, heat, pain, and rigidity or impaired function. And they're caused deliberately. When your knee hurts because you overdid it, or you sprained your ankle, your body is telling you, I'm sorry, I'm going to puff this area up so you can't move it. Don't walk on this. Sit down, rest, give me some time to heal this. So the swelling is stage 1 of inflammation, inflammatory stage 1. And in that stage, there are things called lysosomes. They're enzymes. They are made by our body and they begin to digest injured cell materials. They also produce histamine. Histamine it's a compound in the body that creates irritation. It's what makes you scratch a mosquito bite. Histamine increases blood flow, partly because you're scratching. And your the body is walling off an area. It's puffing it up, opening all the channels, the lymphatic vessels, the red blood transport channels, the arteries. It's opening everything up for the better arrival and deportation of nutrients and wastes, right? So increased blood flow begins inflammatory stage 2. Stage 2 is congestion, heat. The body heats an area in case there's opening, a wound, and bacteria have entered. So that starts the process of chemotaxis. This is the cleanup by the body's own big eater cells, scavengers, who work in a very specific sequence. Chemotaxis, inflammatory stage 3, involves 4 kinds of eater cells: phagocytes, neutrophils, eosinophils, and macrophages. And each one has a different menu item and function. For instance, the eosinophils release the counter enzyme to histamine. It's histaminase. I think that's how you say it. And that reduces swelling as the debris is removed. The macrophages, which are the 4th in the sequence, they consume the earlier stage eaters when their jobs are done. So we've got this chemotaxis process. This is not bacterial. This is our own body's cells, our own army, 4 different ranks. And the last ones eat up all the former ones. And inflammatory stage 4 kicks off the lymphocytes coming in. Those are the white blood cells that are repair-oriented, and they regenerate the tissues. So the biochemistry of inflammation and repair is pretty amazing. When you supply, again, the right materials for in terms of nutrients that the body makes into its own nutrient compounds, you're going to get real repair going on. When you interfere with those inflammatory stages, stage 1, 2, 3, and 4, with all the different cells and all the different activities that are deliberately following each other in a sensible order, you are going to sabotage the body's repair process. So the antihistamines that they prescribe neutralize the histamines and they hinder inflammatory stage 1. Then they give us steroids like cortisol, prednisone, NSAIDs, aspirin, ibuprofen, and that interferes with inflammatory stages 2 and 3. The antibiotics hinder stages 3 and 4, and all this paves the way for incomplete repair and recurring chronic problems. Now that's significant in our lives. Who doesn't have a chronic problem, an old injury? Oh, now my elbow hurts again. If you don't interfere with the body's healing, if you don't try to retard the stages of inflammation and stop them and get in their way, you're going to have complete repair. That will enable the problem to be done and over with. Otherwise, you're going to have a chronic issue because it's incomplete repair.
Now, what about people that have, let's say, chronic inflammation like RA, gout, those types of things there? How would we explain to them how that inflammation is a process of healing? Because they would turn around and say, I'm incapacitated because of all this swelling and all of this inflammation.
Right. Inflammation is the sign that they have degeneration and breakdown going on. In the case of rheumatoid arthritis, RA as you called it, that's an autoimmune disease. And Dr. Mercola, it's on my blog, I put that interview up. He did a wonderful interview with a former patient of his that changed everything in her life and recovered from crippling rheumatoid arthritis. So once again, you have to educate yourself and you have to start supplying the body with the correct repair materials and nutrition and sunlight and all the other stuff we've discussed several times. The reason inflammation hurts is because you have a lot of disintegration of your own tissue structures.
And the whole thing with autoimmune, going back to that for a second, the autoimmune is out of control. I've read some articles where if you went back 30, 40, 50 years ago, autoimmune was not something that anybody even knew about. And I'm going to say, and I'm surmising here, that autoimmune is growing exponentially within people because of the external inputs or variables that people are ingesting, breathing in, that they're exposed to, and so on. As an example, some integrated medicine doctors are are convinced that rheumatoid arthritis, RA, is the result of Lyme disease or mold and those types of things there. We have these inputs going into our bodies. As an example, GMOs are known to create new allergens. And that, of course, then increases the market for over-the-counter allergy medications, which years ago you had to have a prescription to get allergy medication. Today, you can go buy it in the store like you're buying a can of corn. So I guess the point I'm making, Sofia, is it goes back again to your point, is that we have to get a blank piece of paper. I'm talking about everybody, myself included, and really do a lot of work to understand what is it that we are taking into our body, what is it that we're exposing ourselves to, and start erasing a lot of that stuff and doing a lot of things a whole lot different.
Mike, I once received a huge, thick binder from someone who had done a lot of research on Lyme disease, and I gave it to someone else who had Lyme disease, and I've never gotten it back. But I've heard that Lyme disease is a particular kind of spirochete, and it's maybe something that the body isn't familiar with, hasn't encountered before, and when it takes up in the body, it does its own thing in a way that isn't harmonious with our internal system. Okay, so there are a lot of molds and spores out there that are engineered, Dictyostelium, Discoideum. There's an Omycetes form. These are simple. I just learned that Dictyostelium has only 8 genes in it. It's very easy to re-engineer and then introduce through our waterways and soil. I know a lot of people who've contracted, for instance, Morgellons syndrome from gardening, just dabbling in mud, and one guy was trying to fix his sewer lines himself in his backyard, and he got it. But I'm not saying that everybody is going to get this from gardening. I'm just saying there's something out there that they've engineered that goes along with their promotion of sepsis that can get a foothold in us. Even when you have too much black mold in your house as a result of a water flood issue, you can get sick from that. And it's all because of, the bioterrain imbalance. When you inhale black mold spores, now suddenly you're having an issue because they're throwing your whole internal universe out of balance.
And there are researchers going back to the engineered stuff, that Lyme disease was engineered. Another situation where something was created artificially and introduced into the natural environment, and this is what's breaking people down.
Yeah, because they haven't encountered it. It doesn't belong in the natural scheme, in the natural, body and earth universe. So you bring in those foreign things that can perhaps, there are self-replicating forms of organisms, engineered organisms, and then maybe they're taught to feed on a certain component or material in the body, and then suddenly your body goes, what do I do with this?
Yeah, I think your body does that with all of the GMOs, the fluoride, the aspartame, all of that. Anytime you take something into your body that your body doesn't recognize and does not know what to do with it naturally, you're going to exert an enormous amount of energy. The body is trying to figure out what to do with this, whatever it is that you've put in your body. This is when your body breaks down. And this is when you start getting pains and rashes and all those types of things, because something's going to happen. The body's just not going to chug along and be healthy. Something is going to break down. Something's going to manifest because you're taking this junk into your body.
Right. The rash is an expression of the skin trying to get rid of a foreign material that's not wanted. And, the skin, the sneezing, coughing, diarrhea, vomiting, reflex, that's all part of your Th1 immune system. So like I said before, the immune system isn't in one place. It's all over. It's a component connection. And when you can't get rid of something, your Th2 immune system takes over. That is the internal immune system. And it says the Th1 is cell-mediated and the Th2 is antibody. It's the antibody system. And it makes antibodies to counter and battle these foreign materials that the first level of immune defense, Th1, couldn't get rid of physically by sneezing, coughing, bowel, urine, whatever, effluences of various kinds.
I thought that this was really a very, very good newsletter. And it made me think, I'll tell you that. So that's why I wanted to cover this on the show. I know that we discussed whether it was something that we could do a show about, and I was really, as you know, pretty adamant about I thought we should, and I'm really glad that we did.
Right. Thank you, Mike. I mean, this newsletter was so hard for me to write. I really struggled with it because some of these concepts, I had heard of pleomorphism, but I never really knew what it was. And then I realized, oh my God, it has a place in this picture I'm trying to paint, but I have to understand it better before I try writing about it. I mean, I can't presume to write about something and explain it to other people if I don't understand it. And so literally, I could feel my brain sizzling and frying as I was trying to get these concepts better understood. But what I really like about what you and I kind of have talked about recently as we prepared for this show is this concept of sepsis, too much sepsis in the world, and consequent biological darkness. That's the key to this. We are living in biological darkness, increasing biological darkness.
We are, and I'm hoping with this show that we'll get some people to awaken and pay attention and understand exactly what it is that you're delivering here, and they can hopefully make some changes in their life, and they'll be healthier for it. You know, they'll spend less time going off and getting pharmaceuticals and drugs.
Right. You know, Mike, two very simple things are iodine and magnesium. Iodine basically reaches every cell in your body. It promotes apoptosis in certain glands, reproductive system, which is the regulated cell division. So it's considered an anti-cancer supplement, iodine. It's very inexpensive. It's on my website, avatarproducts.com. Along with the magnesium products that are so great. You just smear the cream into your sore muscles and joints, and it works very quickly, and it supplies your body with lots of magnesium. That's the number 2 mineral that we're deficient in. So just iodine, magnesium, water, real sun, these things will help you in untold ways, and they're cheap, practically free.
Yeah, and I'm going to include the link to the iodine show that you and I did. That was a very good show. It received a lot of views, and it's still chugging along. And so, folks, if you haven't seen that show, and to learn more about the benefits of iodine, I will include the link down below. So please click on it. It was really a great show that will give you a lot of information and explain to you how iodine benefits you and how it's been taken out of our diets, like everything else that's good for us, has basically kind of been pushed aside. And as Sofia said, it's not expensive, and it's a great way to really bolster your health.
Yes, iodine used to be added to flour and salt.
Yeah,
It still is.
Bread.
Yeah, because those were our food staples. That's how much the government even cared about it back then. But let me just throw this in. As of about 1980, medical school instructors were told to stop talking about iodine. Iodine was a massively utilitarian go-to in the health world for 100 years at least. But they were told, don't speak of iodine because we want patients, people who are not feeling well, to go to their doctors and be given pharmaceutical products to address the very same things that iodine can so easily take care of. And these pharmaceutical products are expensive, and they're, much more complicated formulations and compounds, and most of the time they don't even work.
Going back to the magnesium for a second, I use the magnesium product, and I also want to tell folks that we're not talking about this because Sofia sells this. Sofia sells these things because they are beneficial to your health and to giving you a healthier lifestyle. Now, with the magnesium, and you know this story, Sofia, I had tennis elbow. Every time I would go to the gym, once you get that, it's very painful. There's a lot of exercises you can't do. And that type of injury, what will happen is it could take 3, 4, 5 months for the muscle and the tendon and everything else that's involved to heal. And what I did was I was taking the magnesium cream and I was rubbing it on 2 or 3 times a day. And it really accelerated the healing. I mean, it cut the healing time down, I want to say, easily by 2/3, easily.
Well, I'm happy to hear that, Mike, because of you telling me that, I actually used it a lot myself this summer because I had a tear of the MCL, medial collateral ligament, in the knee. That's the stabilizing ligament for the inside of the leg. And I was in great pain. It takes a long time to heal.
Yep.
I hadn't figured it out until I was halfway through this recovery period. But magnesium cream several times a day was just invaluably helpful. And, you know, I have a new product in my Avatar product store. It's a friend of mine, her creation. She made a household cleaner spray. I know a lot of people have those kinds of sprays that they use or like to use. Some of them are commercial, but this is Mrs. Hamilton's Whole Home Cleaner, and it is made with organic tea tree and other essential oils, organic vinegar, distilled water, and great care. And she said you can even spray it on your palm and transfer it to your dog or cat, and it's a great flea repellent. There are so many uses for it. There's a concentrate. So I just put it up the other day. I want to see how it does, but I love it. It's very fresh smelling, and you want to use it, and it's totally safe to use. It doesn't coat all your household surfaces with chemicals. You know, that's the thing. They got us using these chemical products, and it was the chemicals that made us sick. And, of course, this age of radiation that we live in now.
Yeah, I'm going to go to your store and buy some. I use Myers, which is all organic and natural, and I don't use any of the stuff I used to use. I used to use 409 and all that stuff. A lot of people used to or still do, you know, and I found that these types of cleaners that you're talking about, they're actually better at cleaning and breaking down the dirt and the grime than a lot of the stuff that they're selling in the supermarket.
Oh, yeah. I am a lover of borax, Mule Team borax. You can shake that in your bathtub or toilet and take a brush and scrub, and it's, you know, a little bit granular, so it scrapes dirt off. You can add it to your laundry to boost laundry detergent, which in my case is always the Himalayan soap nuts. They're wonderful. Himalayan soap liquid now. That's on my website as well. But there are such simple things you can use. Sometimes all you need is water and a sponge. You know, you don't need something to spray. My friends' concoctions make your bathroom and kitchen smell really, really good. So it's those essential oils. And I just think it's a great thing to have around. I think you get fond of see, that's another thing. Now we get into aromatherapy. There is no way, Mike, your sense of well-being is going to be boosted by the smell of 409 or Lysol. There's no way. I mean, they're pretty weird, awful smells.
Yeah, they try to make them smell nice with lemon scent and stuff like that, but it's all artificial garbage.
It is. So
yeah.
The essential oils are the best. I went into a friend's house once, and he had a big can of Lysol on his kitchen counter, huge can. I said, "What do you use this for?" He said, "Well, I cooked some fish last night." I said, "So you sprayed Lysol?" He said, "Yeah, throughout my whole apartment."
Duh. I'd rather smell the fish. Oh, man. What does his house smell like? Lysol?
Somewhat. I just couldn't believe it. I said, get rid of that.
Yeah, people just don't know, Sophia. You know, it's an education process. It's a matter of understanding, you know, that this stuff is not good for you. It's marketed as, you know, it doesn't do anything to you. It's harmless unless you drink it, you know. Don't worry about breathing it in. That's okay.
Exactly.
It's just amazing. Yeah, it's just amazing.
But, you know, Mike, in his case, I think it comes from his childhood. His mother, they grew up poor, and she used Lysol because she saw it on television.
Yeah.
So he kept it around because he was a single father, and he thought he was doing a good thing by spraying it throughout the apartment because of the fish smell.
Yeah, it's a disinfectant, and Mom used it, and it's been in the family. And no, look, I'm not picking on anybody because I've done the same things. You know, it's not until I figured it out that, you know what, it doesn't matter who was using it before me. This stuff is no good. So we should stop using that, you know, those types of products.
Yeah.
Yeah, right?
We have so far to go.
We do, but that's why we do these shows, right? We do these shows because we discover things, and we figure, well, why not share it and see if some folks have ears, and if it resonates with them, they'll run with it. If not, you know, they'll just continue to do the things that they do.
I just thought of a small thing. Don't fall for the term antiseptic on products. I was going to say, as a note to finish on, we should think about, all right, I'm doing X, Y, Z. Does it promote sepsis or antisepsis? Antisepsis is the sun. It's life-giving. And sepsis is degeneration. So if you'll see in the store products, it says antiseptic, right? That's chemical antiseptic. So when I say, does it promote sepsis or antisepsis, we're talking about natural, life-giving sunlight as antisepsis.
No, that's a good point to make, because those words, antiseptic, it has connotation going back to products and Lysol and antibacterial soaps and stuff like that, people are always rubbing on their hands. People have to start thinking more naturally, more organically, and that's going to help, like I said, better environment, healthier you. You couldn't ask for much more.
Right. That's when you'll start to thrive. You'll feel better. And I'm going to put up the Andrew Saul interview on my website as soon as I finish it. Very, very good. Basic stuff to know about hospitals, to know about sepsis in the hospital setting. So, okay, Mike, thank you so much for the interview opportunity. And once again, I just want the listeners to know that I have grappled with this. So if I sounded a little bit discombobulated, I am not any kind of research, medical type science expert. I'm just doing my best to break down concepts into communicable form.
You did a great job, Sophia. I'm telling you, you did a great job, so no worries. And that concludes another Sage of Quay interview, and I hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as I did. Links to my guests' websites and social media are listed in the show notes below. And as always, I'd like to thank everyone for listening and visiting the blog. You can get to the blog by typing in sageofquayradio.blogspot.com or simply head over to our hub website at sageofquay.com. Also, if you get a moment, please visit laboroflovemusic.com to listen to my album, Leaving Dystopia. And remember, live in truth and always serve creation. It's really that simple. See everyone next week. Be safe, enjoy, and God bless.